Welcome to another AMA with Kadena Project Network. In this episode, we speak with Emily Pilmore, the Lead PACT developer for Kadena. This conversation was recorded on September 23rd, 2022, live on Twitter Spaces. The views and expressions in this AMA do not represent the views of KPN directly and are not to be considered as financial advice. Please make sure to do your own research on the projects presented. Also make sure to follow our account to be alerted of new uploads. Now let's get started. Enjoy. Welcome everybody to another AMA with Kadena Project Network. We are talking with Emily Pilmore, the Lead PACT developer for Kadena. So should be very interesting conversation. So why don't we just start with a quick introduction about yourself, Emily, your background, what got you into crypto, and more specifically, Kadena itself.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Pilmore. I'm currently the tech lead for the PACT programming language. I've been with Kadena for about 4 years now. I was with it before it launched. I was with it when it launched, and for all the sort of pain and suffering of the past 3 years. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm definitely happy to be here. My background is mostly in finance. I got my start as an analyst at Goldman Sachs back in 2015 after graduating with a mathematics degree from Utah. And eventually just sort of taught myself how to program and ended up doing some like CCAR auditing on Wall Street and doing some model validation stuff with C++ for various companies as a consultant. And then eventually just found my way into tech proper, working at Disney and other sort of very high sort of throughput and high demand places, working on some very big systems like ESPN's live video on demand stuff. But eventually found my way back into finance as I wanted to switch languages, but also I kind of missed the finance aspect and some of the math aspect in my programming. And I just started looking for companies around me at the time, and I found Kadena. And being a complete crypto noob at the time, I wasn't aware of really what I was getting into. But slowly I've kind of been convinced that it's a net positive on the world, and I'm just happy to be here. So that's it.
Awesome. You definitely have a very good background for, even though, like you said, you got into crypto pretty much with Kadena, and that was like your crypto intro, but still, your background even before that definitely, with Haskell and everything definitely led towards kind of where you are now. It's like it was kind of meant to be almost.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It was actually my first Haskell job. Surprisingly, I was working in Scala before this. I just happened to take to Haskell, and it's been my language of choice for half a decade. So I'm happy with it, and happy to sort of do some time leading the language in its technical direction for a year or two. I think over 2020 through 2021, and yeah, it makes sense to me. So it's all good.
So for anyone that's kind of maybe new to Kadena or really new to what smart contracts are, can you go over really what PACT is and what it brings to the blockchain space and how people can utilize it?
I had a long answer written out for something like this, just in case somebody asked me this question, because I've been thinking about it a lot lately and trying to figure out kind of where PACT slots into the industry, which has so many languages available, and everyone's sort of offering something cool. But I think for us, we do thread a particular needle, which is we're probably the only people who can do it because of the way that we've constructed our ecosystem. So just to give a little history about PACT, we started learning about what we wanted to do before we wrote the language, right? So when Stuart was doing his initial runs of what the language was going to look like, he was looking at Ethereum and he was looking at Solidity and looking at Bitcoin script and these other languages that were available at the time, and saying, Bitcoin script maybe isn't expressive enough, and Solidity is kind of too big of a surface area for a language. There's so many problems in between the two that, how do we really figure out what's going to be both safe, effective, efficient, and going to give us the sort of maximal expressivity for the surface area, which is appropriate for smart contract development. So he ended up writing an interpreter for Ethereum called Masala, which is actually out there for JP Morgan, I believe, and sort of exercising a little, thought experiments in this little Lisp-like language that he had called PACT. And PACT has slowly sort of just been evolving over time, adding features as we figure out things that should exist in the language. And basically, we wanted something that is purpose fit for smart contract development, but gives you enough rope to kind of do what you need to do without giving you so much that you can hang yourself, right? So Solidity, for example, has a lot of things that you can do and a lot of features of the language. A lot of them, may be controversial, like the existence of Turing completeness or mutability in the language, which are kind of like the worst of, or not necessarily worst, but the least sort of secure functionalities in many languages that really need to be looked at and monitored properly. And exposing these in the language are, it may be a good thing. It may be because, maybe good because other people can sort of translate their intuition about how the world should work to the language. But in terms of an actual feature, many of these things that Solidity brings are actually too powerful for general smart contract development and logic that should go on the blockchain. And likewise, you have Bitcoin script, which is sort of this very small, Turing incomplete scripting language, which has not a lot that you can do with it, but it is very well constructed. Didn't get any sort of traction because you couldn't do enough with it to do sort of like effective smart contract development and that kind of. So PACT attempts to sort of split the difference and figure out, how do we keep the surface area minimal but keep the expressiveness high? And I think we've managed to do that, and we've managed to incorporate a few of sort of like very key things, like it's a Turing incomplete language, but you have these sort of very functional primitives available to you. You have a standard library, you have sort of basic metaphors for interacting with a database, and you can construct smart contracts in a relatively quick and sort of effective manner without having to worry about the gigantic surface area for bugs associated with things like reentrancy or just weird mutable state living in the sky. So we focus on that. We focus on bringing, a good bang for your buck in terms of expressivity versus security. We also notice that if you work in a smaller language, you're almost immediately working in a fragment of a language that can be verified. And we wanted to bring, the notion of formal verification and sort of automated bug finding and embed that directly in the language. So you can code directly to that sort of model-driven API that you really care to hit. And third, I think probably the biggest thing that we're going to be focusing on in the next 2 or 3 years here is it works, with the paradigm that Kadena is bringing. So it works with the private blockchain and with the public blockchain and with anyone who actually cares to integrate with language. So actually, it's kind of wrong to think of Kadena as a crypto like blockchain provider with a smart contract language. It's actually the opposite. We are a language provider which works with blockchains, and we choose to provide a few blockchains for you to work with.
That kind of loops into another question that I had for you, was the fact of seeing PACT on other chains besides Kadena. Like, do you see it crossing through chains in the future?
Yeah, so we actually already have done this. Kadena was a POC that exists in the Cosmos ecosystem. Or sorry, not Kadena shoot, what did we call it? I totally forget. We have integrated with Cosmos. We do have, I believe, an interpreter up on what was the blockchain that we worked with? I totally forget. I'm spacing right now. I'm being very dumb. I'm gonna have to come back and actually figure out what the name of that project was. but we did this a while ago. Like the fact of the matter with PACT is that, it is blockchain agnostic. All you really need to do is figure out how an interpreter works. We have a grant open. So we finished Cosmos. We have a grant pending with the Polkadot ecosystem for integration with their chains. It would be great if they, follow through on that. we're kind of just sitting here waiting for them to say, go ahead, and then we're gonna, spin up a parachain and get an interpreter on their blockchain. But like, it's already happening, and anyone who really wants to sort of integrate with us and integrate with the language and sort of believes in its feature set, we're happy to talk about it, and we're happy to help integration move along.
It really goes back to what they have said for a long time with Kadena, where we are going to have a future where there's going to be multiple blockchains, but one smart contract language to cross them all, to make them all be able to speak with each other. So that's kind of what you guys are trying to build with PACT, correctly? Is just something that's going to be that cross-chain ability, smart language that is going to bring all of these chains together.
Yeah, exactly. All of these things tend to have the same sort of features and the same look to them. And really all of it is a metaphor for working with a database which gives you specific guarantees. So, the fact that you're working on a proof of stake network should not affect the smart contracts that you write for a proof of work network. It's all just the database that you choose to interact with, which brings certain guarantees for the consistency of the database. So it doesn't make sense to have a blockchain with a language that only works with that blockchain. I think that's just a consequence of us all sort of working in our own little niches and saying, I want, why I want to control my ecosystem, when in fact we don't have to. And to be honest, it's a lot less work.
It can be comparable to Apple and how Apple is very proprietary over their software, their components, everything like that, as opposed to, say, a Google or someone that uses open source software to build their items and things like that. Why limit yourself to just your very small avenue when you could have something that's more encompass of the entire community as a whole using those languages?
Exactly.
Okay, so as far as
Kadena
when you say like things, oh, okay, okay, perfect. One thing about PACT we've read about in the past is this talk about PACT Core. Could you give us a little brief outline about what that is and if it's still in the works and what it entails?
Yeah, so PACT Core was something that I started thinking about sometime in 2019 after we had launched. And we decided, actually, no, 2020, right before COVID. Time dilation is weird. But the idea was that, we were looking at PACT and saying, okay, we've gotten into a point where it's functional and it works for the blockchains that we support, the private, the public, Kadena Mint, and, Kadena Dot would have been fine. But one of the requirements from Polkadot was actually really weird, and it got me really thinking about what we need the structure of the language to be. And the requirement from Polkadot was you need to be able to fit the interpreter in some ridiculously small number of kilobytes. I think it was like 192 kilobytes or something like that. And so far, we ship binaries, but they're something like 10 megabytes. It's like, that's never going to work. But also,
oh, it looks like we may have lost a little connection there with Emily. Give her a few minutes to come back. Oh, there we go.
I'm back, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. So where did I leave off? Polkadot, right? So we had to fit an interpreter in 192 kilobytes worth of memory, which is the only thing that their chain was kind of able to support at the time. And I was thinking, like, how do we get this interpreter to actually be agnostic of the language itself? Like, what's the structure of a language that allows us to do something like that? Because we want to be able to support multiple blockchains with this thing. And I came to the conclusion that we're really looking at a particular kind of machine that runs like a very concise core language, which is almost similar to like EVM bytecodes, which, it's an alternative way of thinking about the same thing. It's less functional. They're more sort of like an imperative approach, and we're doing the functional thing, which is just a difference of sort of opinion and soundness and how you execute opcodes. And I was like, okay, we can split this up like this. But what does that mean? That means that if we split PACT up into a core language, which is this concise thing that runs on this very small machine, then that actually is really, really helpful for us, because we can query the core language, we can JIT, we can do any number of things before it goes out to the sort of end interpreter. And we can actually integrate a lot of tooling with this thing. So I started rolling with it and I was like, what other things do we get for free if we start, decoupling the language and its evaluator from its intermediate representations? And I arrived at this idea where, we have sort of multiple steps to interpretation, where at each level, it has an API that people can query into, and they can look at every stage of compilation along the way. And it turned out that, like, okay, this means we can really optimize the language. We can make it agnostic of its syntax, which means the people who are like, oh no, it's a Lisp, I hate a Lisp, don't actually need to code in a Lisp. They can code in a Python, which compiles down to any number of these intermediate representations, and they can have their cake and eat it too. So we've been rolling with this, and I think sometime in 2021 we decided, you know what, yeah, let's commit to this, because our tooling ecosystem wins if we do this, because suddenly there's a grammar that tooling people can code to. There's IDE engines that are immediately writable as soon as we have a grammar. We satisfy all the people that are, screaming about the Lisp syntax. We get a faster interpreter that is more amenable to optimization. We have smaller interpreters that we can throw on the blockchain. We can do this in Rust. We can do this in WASM. We can have any number of different interpreters that we compile down to from our intermediate representation. And we can kind of just handle all of the things that people are asking for in one swoop. So PACT Core, just to summarize, is this series of efforts to decouple the language and its components to produce interpreters that work in a variety of languages, and the surface syntax that works for a variety of sort of language-like syntaxes like JavaScript or Scala or Python or Lisp. And to basically just make the language more amenable to ecosystem tooling and builders who want to build out various projects for the language in an agnostic way that doesn't force them to read and write Haskell.
So, final story, did you end up getting it down to the required size for Polkadot?
I think we can. It remains to be seen whether or not we can do that, but I'm not going to be too angry if we don't hit the ridiculous requirement. I think if we can get a WASM interpreter, I think it should be able to compress to something like 192 kilobytes. They did that for Rust, and I think we're a little smaller than Rust, so we should be okay.
Yeah, that's extremely small when you really think about, like, even the amount of data that can go into a Bitcoin transaction. That's a really small amount of data that we're talking about here. So to compress something into that would be quite a good feat. And like you said, it'll be good for the entire ecosystem, for everything, not just Kadena, but other networks and everything as well. So it's definitely a tool that I can see, like you said, also solving a lot of the problems and questions that other people have asking across other languages, and just be that bridge, that barrier that will break it down and open the door for other people to build.
Yeah. And one of those doors that we really need to break down is the fact that we're written in Haskell, and that's a very niche language. I would love to open this up to everybody who, has expertise in Rust or Python or JavaScript, and really just open the door for everyone in their expertise to start helping out.
Speaking about Haskell, so basically you kind of started off your programming and chose Haskell as your language to learn. And it seems like the guys from Kadena were already kind of on board with Haskell as they were building. So how do you find that that was what shaped PACT? Was that kind of the thing that led you towards building PACT the way you guys did?
I think it's kind of separate. Like Haskell gives you guarantees that you're never normally going to encounter in general development, just through the strength of its type system and the way you're forced to build programs. But PACT itself is not like the best example of Haskell code in the world. It's a good example of sort of purpose-fit, objective-driven coding in Haskell. But there are things that Haskell brings to the table that we are not taking advantage of, namely the sort of like incredible world-class suite of optimizations that apply in GHC that you get when you sort of tease things out in a very composable manner. So into these basic sort of intermediate representations. I was happy to join in with the Haskell development at Kadena because sort of very smart people love to code in Haskell, but that doesn't mean they code great things. And I like working on great things, and I'm not sort of the best Haskeller in the world. So I like the fact that we're combining sort of great ideas with great skills and coming up with something that's sort of an optimal Haskell representation. And yeah, I mean, we could write it in Rust, we could write it in Python, we could write it in any number of things, but Haskell seems to be the one that gives us all the guarantees that we need in order to execute effectively and quickly in a way that the other languages simply couldn't. There's too much to consider.
Now, speaking of other chains, what about in comparison of PACT to, say, Cardano's Plata system? Because they've been talking a lot lately about how they have predictable contract execution and small gas fees. Do you see anything better that PACT is doing, or similarities even?
Well, we have predictable fees as well. It's a consequence of having any sort of gas metered system. Plutus, as a prospect, I think is not my favorite in the world. For one, the sort of integration with Haskell, I think, immediately nichifies the language in a way that really doesn't make it amenable to general development from people who aren't going to write serious bugs in their smart contracts. I think the higher the bar to understanding what your code is doing, the greater the surface area for bugs in these things that you write. Because on average, it takes roughly double the amount of brain power to understand the bugs that you're writing in your code and to debug them than it does to actually write the code. On top of that, I don't see sort of claiming that your language is predictable is anything other than something that you should get in any language. So Truffle and Solidity get you this guarantee. PACT and its REPL test get you this guarantee, as do the various dry run APIs on the blockchain. But the real functionality I think one has to look at is not what the language gets you to do. It's what it gets you to not do. And with Plutus, you can write basically anything. And if you only ever integrate with their language, then you are tied to the blockchain. And the blockchain itself is extended UTXO format, which means you have exactly one state change per block, which means most DeFi is out of reach, at least decentralized finance. You can probably do centralized finance if you trust an Oracle or something. And I'm just not convinced overall. I mean, there's things I can't say. There's things I'm not allowed to say. But I'm not terribly enthusiastic about Plutus.
Fair enough, fair enough. I was just saying because I do see there are some similarities between some things that Kadena uses and some things that Cardano uses. For example, the public-private key generation code seems to be very similar to Cardano's generation code. Is that something that maybe you could speak about?
Do you mean the BIP32 format?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was originally Bitcoin. And Cardano, in its wisdom, took something good from Bitcoin, and as did we.
Well, when you really think about it, I think everything really comes from Bitcoin being, the priority first horse out the door.
Yeah.
But even though Bitcoin still took from many other programming languages even before that, it's people really, they look at the history of crypto and they don't only look back to Bitcoin, but you really need to go and read the white paper from Bitcoin and look into the things that are quoted in there. And you can go back as far as like the 40s and 50s, like cryptography has such a lengthy history that people don't really know about. And it's crazy to think of where you can see where it started from and how it's being used today and the ways that it can change the world and change the future and change how things are secured, how things are exchanged from person to person, and really just bringing either the power. It could either bring even more centralized power, or it could totally free the world from central control. But there's got to be that fine line, and there has to be the tools to bridge the two before we can go one way or the other. And hopefully Kadena and PACT will be bringing these tools and things, and hopefully people will see it for what it is, and PACT will be able to be a cross-chain thing that helps everyone further grow the blockchain as a whole. Now, as far as like tools and stuff being built with PACT, do you have any kind of like a wish list of things that you'd like to see built with PACT? Maybe some different smart contract tools that could be made. Just kind of like throw some ideas out there.
That's an interesting question. I usually just focus on what I want to do for the language for you guys. But in terms of smart contracts, I will say I want to see a wallet that can handle multi-chain architecture as it's supposed to be handled. I think it's one of the sort of great tragedies that we didn't realize exactly how tedious handling multiple transactions would be for many chains and sort of crossing, funds over and how to deal with that stuff. No one's really done it yet. Even Chainweaver. We would really love to see some people attempting to have sort of like a wallet that hides the fact that there are multiple chains going on. That can orchestrate things behind the scenes and sort of manage your funds in a way that is sort of optimal for managing transactions on every chain all at once, as opposed to individual chains and then aggregating on a single chain and doing transactions on that single chain. In terms of smart contracts,
so like a chain aggregator tool that could possibly, like, someone could easily move all their coins and tokens just to one chain, and it automatically does all of the interactions in one contract kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly. Or say you wanted to transfer from me to you. It shouldn't matter what chain I'm on. It should only matter how many funds I have distributed across all chains. And I should be able to take that distribution and say, I have X amount of Kadena, and I'm going to send it to you, and the tool should distribute it evenly across all chains or according to whatever distribution you want. And I should never have to say, I'm going to transfer it to Chris on chain one. It should just be, I'm Emily, and I'm transferring it to Chris. And that's it. That's a hard question to figure out.
Yeah,
because it is tricky.
Yeah, that's something we get a lot of too. Is like a lot of the people are like when they come into, say, one of the marketplaces or one of the dexes or something like that. Oh, what chain does it run on? Oh, okay, now I have to move funds from this chain to that chain before I can do this. Where it would be just so much easier if just address to address, and the back end does the work for you.
Exactly. That's the way it should be, and I think that's going to be the future. The future is going to be you're interacting with the Kadena blockchain, not a Kadena blockchain chain. It doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it's 20 L1s wrapped up together. instead of just one with multifaceted chains built into it,
Exactly.
in a sense.
Exactly. Yes.
So yeah, no, that's definitely something I hopefully we can see in the future. I know there's quite a few different people right now building wallets and building infrastructure out. So hopefully people listening will take this into heart, because that is definitely something that I feel like everyone in the community says is one of their things that are confusing about Kadena. They understand the whole 20 chains and, the fact that, the more chains you have, the more throughput you can handle and more transactions per second. But if those chains can't talk to each other, do you really have those increased transactions per second? It kind of just, it's a bunch of limited chains, whereas it should all work as one big giant ecosystem.
Agreed. Agreed. I think in terms of smart contracts, there's any number of things that are sort of like you would be first to market if you came up with them. Um, a decent betting system is difficult to find. I don't know what the status of KDA bets is, um, but let's see. Betting systems are one. I would like to see just a really decent like vault application. Uh, I don't really have too many requests in terms of smart contracts. It's mostly in terms of features for interacting with the blockchain that I'm focused on. So that's it.
Well, it's like I said, it's up to, I've always said this, people always say, oh, the Kadena team, is so slow to do this and build this. Why aren't they building a good NFT marketplace for us and blah, blah, blah. I keep telling people that's not their job. Their job is to build the protocol that then people can then build those things on themselves. And it's up to the community to step forward and really take up that cause and really build these things. And we have a bunch of really great people who are out there building some really great tools. For example, KD Launch / KD Swap, those guys have been building some really excellent tools that have really helped the community. And I'm sure that, as things develop more and as you guys finish up more, putting out more releases for PACT or updates on Kuro or any of the other systems you guys are working on, that, even more of these things will be able to be built. Speaking of which, Kuro has been kind of a hot spot, which is kind of one of the things I believe that KDA bet / equal bet was having an issue with. Any say on that for the community?
Yeah. So unsatisfyingly, I think we until we find some time to actually work on this stuff outside of our sort of respective roadmaps on all the sort of major features of the ecosystem. It's hard to justify working on it other than in my spare time, which is really difficult for me to manage at this point. I do want to see Kuro working again, so I am pushing for this internally, but we do only have one person or one team who kind of need it, and other than that, it's kind of been dormant for a year or two. I have taken a look at what's needed in order to get that up and running, but it's going to have to happen on my time, and maybe I'll find time in the next quarter or the next quarter, but I would say don't hold your breath until I say I've got a pull request up and we can get this done.
That being said, it is GitHub. People can put in pull requests themselves. Would you be open to, if someone was to take on, downloading Kuro and working it through and working on some requests? Do you guys ever look over those and consider pulling those?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if somebody else wants to do it, I'll review it all day. It just takes a lot of time for me to do it myself. Um, on top of that, it is a layer two. It is a private blockchain, which is not necessarily a sort of well-loved form of layer two. And we are working on other alternatives to something like Kuro as a means of sort of fast settlement layers. Namely, we are working with the folks from Electron Labs to get us zero knowledge proof primitives within the next kill switch, actually, we do have, ZK, a form of ZK arithmetic circuit proofs available starting, I think, October 22nd or 26th, one of the two. So if anyone wanted to use a layer 2 for sort of fast rollups or some kind of like easy, fast settlement, we do have options that are not Kuro coming down the pipeline.
So so now we've figured out more about Kuro. What can you give us kind of an idea of the team's timeline of what you see as the most pressing things that the team are working on right now? Would that be, say, Marmalade, or is it just straight up PACT? Kind of maybe a quick little, just kind of, top 3 things you guys are working on right now?
Top 3 things. Well, I can tell you a bunch of stuff that's on PACT, and I can give you a little bit more about the everyone else's stuff. But I think you'd have to bring them on to give you a more in-depth review of what everyone else is doing, say for Chainweb Node or for Marmalade. For PACT specifically, we're getting in the zero knowledge proofs in October. We're looking at raising the block gas limit and sort of accommodating for the changes in gas model that came in over the last few kill switches. We are getting you guys namespaces that can be derived from principal account protocols. So going through us is no longer going to be a thing. We're going to have decentralized namespaces coming down in the next few months. The contract changes are already finished. It's already up as a pull request. Anyone can view it on the Chainweb Node repository. We are also looking at revamping the way that we do error messages and error aggregation and sort of offloading sort of error codes or the blockchain caring about error codes to things like the Chainweb API. So those will be some big changes coming up for PACT specifically. For things like Marmalade, Marmalade has been available on GitHub to power users who want to actually use the marketplace contracts for their NFT projects. For the past, I think, like 6 months, we are, I believe, in beta on testnet, and we will be sort of polishing and releasing this sometime soon. I have to double check with the Marmalade folks, but it is nearing completion. So we're getting ready to launch that, and you'll hear more about that coming in the next few months or so. For Chainweb Node, they're working on making the nodes better all the time. We've had a few sort of network hiccups over the past few months that never stopped block production, but are sort of things that we need to fix, and they're just sort of doing their maintenance thing over on around Chainweb Node. So all the exciting things are kind of happening in PACT and the various ecosystem projects and the various marketplaces that are being developed as we speak.
I kind of feel like some of those problems that we've had in the past few weeks were obviously like chains getting congested and causing just massive blocks and transactions to fall. But like you said, it never stopped any blocks from actually being mined or anything like that. Now, would an agitator that's built in or something that spreads it across chains, would you see like that being a way forward?
Congestion actually hasn't been too much of an issue. It wasn't congestion in the past problem that we saw. It was actually a very real engineering problem having to do with floating point numbers, yielding different values after a certain confidence interval for a number of significant figures after the sort of IEEE 754 specified significant figure interval was determined. So like I could talk a little bit about this, but like we in PACT said, okay, we want more precise arithmetic than just 13 significant figures in our floating points. We want to have decimals that go all the way out to like I think 256 significant digits. But it turns out on different architectures that use different compilers, the inlining to and casting to double changes the value of the significant figures after a certain number of significant figures, and you have to record those because the math will be different depending on what operating system and what compiler was used to compile the node. So we sort of figured out what the problem was for a lot of the past issue, and we fixed it, and we put out node releases to fix it. So there shouldn't be more hiccups on that end in the same sense that we had, or nothing as long, right? So usually when we have a network outage, we usually go for like a day or two before we fix it. This one was a little bit more involved and took a little bit longer. But thankfully, you can see the reason why block production didn't stop. The sort of 51% of miners, the majority of miners that got the same answer because they were using the same architecture, prevailed, and blocks kept being produced. But it was an error in some other architectures.
Well, I'm glad that it was found out and at least fixed. So moving forward, we're not going to have those problems, and people can have that more confidence that these problems get fixed right away. Like the team was very quick to get on top of it. A lot quicker than say if a problem would have come up. Like look at Selena. We got a blockchain that goes down for like couple days on end. Like we're not going to see that with Kadena, hopefully.
Yeah, to be honest, this is a triumph of proof of work. You look at Solana, they have to turn it off and turn it back on again. And we kept going, even though there were a few errors on certain architectures, because mining prevails. And that's the way it's supposed to work. Everyone's so used to these sort of catastrophic scenarios where blockchains just shut off or stop working. And we have never stopped working. We've stopped working in some cases for some architectures, but blocks are always being produced, and the blockchain continues.
Yeah, and that's when it comes to proof of work. That's really what matters: is that the blocks are being mined, and the transactions are still being processed. Although it may be skipping over some that are coming from that certain architecture, but it's still going through. Things are still moving. Blocks don't stop, and really, it proves that proof of work is the main network to go with. Have you guys ever even considered proof of stake? Because a lot of people they got Ethereum moving over and everything like that, or is Kadena going to be tried and true proof of work till the day they die?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think we tossed it around at one point, but whether or not we wanted to go proof of stake, or whether we wanted a proof of stake settlement layer, like a layer 2 thing. But honestly, proof of stake really doesn't have the same guarantees that we have as a proof of work system, and it doesn't even necessarily have throughput that necessarily matches what we're already doing with proof of work. So it seems like a downgrade to us. Plus, there's so many incentives that you sacrifice with proof of stake. They call it oligarchy as a service for a reason, right? Having VC control liquidity in the network, or whoever's richest gets the most say in what goes into a block, doesn't really strike me as an ethical enterprise in the same way that proof of works, sort of proof of resources, does. On top of that, we have been noted as an efficient implementation of proof of work, where a lot of times people will move to proof of stake for ecological reasons, or sort of for carbon emissions reasons. But in a lot of cases, proof of work is not necessarily the problem there. It's mostly a problem with miners and miner algorithms being very inefficient in those implementations. So things like Bitcoin and Ethereum had very inefficient implementations, which caused them to waste a lot of energy. Whereas Kadena is actually, according to a few sort of reports here, Crypto Visser, for one, recently did a rating on the speculated sort of carbon footprint of various blockchains. We came in number one as the most green proof of work project, because we have a good mining algorithm that doesn't waste work, and we also have an efficient implementation of the actual proof of work protocol itself. So I'm not entirely convinced that proof of stake is the final answer when we do achieve the throughput that they're already trying to achieve, and we are efficient enough that we are not a serious carbon footprint impact.
It's almost like Kadena is a good example of the opposite of what most people think. Most people think, oh my God, proof of work is going to be the doom of the entire world or something. It seems like, but proof of stake is not anything better. And like you said, it's not bringing to the table anything more that Kadena isn't already doing through proof of work. And I've always not really been, I've never really been a component of the whole, Bitcoin mining and all these different minings are ruining the environment and are such a big, pull on the environment, when really, in comparison to, say, the banking network, which is, uses, a million times more energy than any Bitcoin mining ever will. It's kind of a moot argument, I feel, kind of along the same lines of electric vehicles. Like how do you charge your electric vehicle? With fossil fuels. So what are you really saving there?
I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding between equating sort of a false equivalence between power consumption and carbon footprint, and that's just a basic misunderstanding of how these things work. One can incentivize the use of mining equipment with green energy. You can, and we do this. We offer credits to anyone who's setting up a mining rig with or a mining farm with renewable energy. If they can prove that they're using like wind energy or solar or even hydroelectric, which is a little bit more dubious than the previous two, then we are willing to give them some help getting set up with their farm. There's any number of incentives that people can offer in order to make sure that you do have a net positive impact on the climate while also providing your guarantees. And it's just a choice in where you get your power. A lot of these sort of critiques of the climate thing, were centered around Bitcoin mining, and up to the point where a lot of these things started to appear, most Bitcoin mining was done in Sichuan province using hydroelectric power, which was renewable, and they were selling credits back to the grid because they weren't using so much that it was affecting the the surrounding area. That is in contrast with things like Ethereum, where most GPU farms were set up in like Belarus, and people were using expensive fossil fuels in order to fuel their Ethereum mining. There's any number of ways that you can incentivize this stuff, and I don't think abandoning the prospect is the answer. I think just finding smarter ways to source good renewable energy alternatives is the solution, and that's exactly what we do.
And really, when it comes to mining, your whole bottom thing is how much I can mine and use the least amount of power, because you gotta pay for your power costs. So it is more of an initial cost up front to go the renewable route, especially if you're going solar or something like that. But in the long run, you're going to save more and you're going to mine more because of that, because you have less overhead. And you're also being more green. Like I said, like you said there, a lot of the major mining facilities out there are already turned to green, because it's renewable and they can actually usually bring in more power than what they actually use and sell that power back to the local energy companies. But at the same time, they're doing their part to make sure that mining can keep going and not be a drain on the world. So it's great to hear that Kadena is leading the way in that, for sure.
Yeah, now, it's good
stuff. People, I don't know. I always kind of felt like it was kind of a false argument in a sense. And like you said, people seem to get confused about the carbon footprint versus the electrical use and stuff like that. But, moving forward, definitely, it's about finding things that you can find that nice balance. And Kadena has been able to find that balance, which is really, really awesome. Well, I'm pretty much out of all the questions I had for PACT now. Do you have any kind of alpha or anything that you want to drop on us for things that Kadena has lined up, or that you personally have lined up, or just really any kind of craziness that you want to share with the community?
I'm excited in particular to be working with Electron Labs to get us ZK rollups faster than I think anyone's gone to market with this stuff. We are working with them very closely to get this out by the next kill switch. So I'm going to be watching that one very closely. You know, we're working on it as we speak. It's sort of our highest priority at this point. I think everyone's going to love this stuff. It's going to be very easy to use, and we will have, you know, all the primitives needed to work with sort of a number of elliptic curves almost immediately. Yeah, no, I'm stoked on that one. What else? What else is good? What's going on? We are still working on PACT Core, so I can't say, you know, that one's going to drop immediately, but I will say stay tuned, and you can watch the development on that one on the PACT repo. And I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on PACT. Just raise an issue, and you know, feel free to hit me up with your ideas, and I'm happy to listen to them. Yeah, that's it.
Now, I'm sure you're a very busy person and probably don't have time to follow all of the projects that are being built on top of Kadena right now, but do you have a couple that you've noticed that you're like, wow, these people are really building something cool?
Yeah, so I've interacted with the Kitty Cat folks, and they're really wonderful. So I want to give a shout out to them, and thank you for actually affecting our thinking on what should go into Marmalade through making some really great arguments on like royalty policies and kind of features that we should add to Marmalade. Um, Another one, obviously, KadeX is doing really well. I'm happy with the way KadeX is going, and it's good to see those guys sort of really taking off as the first sort of big project up and running on the Kadena ecosystem. And as always, shout out to Babena.
Awesome. Now, I don't know if you have time for maybe one or two questions from the community. If anyone has any questions, you up for that? Hopefully nothing too crazy.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Well, we got one person that's already requested to speak. So Spaceman, known community member. If you got something to say, go right ahead. Oh, he dipped right out. So if anyone, oh, there he is. Go right ahead.
Hey, hey Emily, this is Spaceman here.
Hi.
Emily, I want to ask you, like, for example, for a guy with there is no prior programming language experience, but if you want to know PACT, does he has to learn Haskell in order to understand PACT, or is there any other way?
Okay, so that's an easy question to answer. No, you do not have to know Haskell to understand PACT. PACT is its own language. It runs in Haskell underneath the hood, just like Python runs in C underneath the hood, but you don't need to know C in order to know Python. It helps, it does help, but no, you're able to get up and running with it as soon as possible just with PACT alone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for the question. I had another community question here from part of my little community. How does Kadena, the Kadena blockchain handle the storing of data on chain, and at what cost?
How does it handle the storing of data on chain? Well, every chain has its own sort of separate sharded database model, which is what we refer to as the PACT database, right? There's a block database, you know, which stores the sort of the hash and Merkle structure of the actual consensus layer, and then there is sort of layers of MySQL, which handle all these state changes per block for every chain. And that thing is it's a checkpointed, rewindable, basically MySQL database that exists on every chain, separate from every chain. And it stores tables as kind of, you know, code blobs with a particular schema inside of it for every contract and so on. We do sort of interesting compaction and stuff to make sure that it never sort of grows extremely large. But we could go more into depth if you were to open an issue and we could fully detail this for you, because it is a little bit of an in-depth question that I don't know if I want to commit to right now.
No problem. I'm sure hopefully the person listening will send in a request and we can get a little conversation going about that. So I don't know if anyone else has any other questions, but I, for one, would love to thank Emily for her time today. It's not very often that we get to speak with an actual team member from Kadena because they are extremely busy people. So I'm very grateful that you were accepted to do this, and it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you today, Emily.
Yeah, cheers. I'm happy to do this anytime. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Of course. And so I'm sure we'll see each other around the different chats. I see that you're one of the few people that are active in quite a few different channels throughout the Kadena system, be it even the scary, deep, dark, scary areas of like whale pool and such. But I hang out in all of the chats as well. So, you got to take what you get from most of them. But again, thank you very much for joining us. And hopefully we can definitely have you on again.
Yeah, they're all good kids. It's okay.
Exactly.
Happy to do this again.
It's all in good fun. It's all in good fun. All right. Well, thank you very much, Emily, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for coming out to listen. And hopefully, like I said, we can do this again sometime. So thank you very much and take care.
Cheers. Bye.
That wraps up another amazing AMA. Thank you for listening. Here at KPN, we strive to bring an open platform for projects being built on Kadena to present themselves to the community. Please ensure to do your own research on each project before investing. Also, make sure to follow us on our social media, from Twitter to subscribing to our weekly newsletter. All the links can be found directly on our SoundCloud profile page. Thank you very much for listening and take care.